Hello, Thunder Wizards, and welcome to Thunder Wizard Vedic Astrology. Today we are going to talk about some Arudha Lagna theory, and we're going to talk about what happens when the Arudha Lagna is in different houses. Now, I previously made a video about this and I had to delete it because I really didn't think it through. I was just starting a new series about the Arudha Lagna, and somebody brought it to my attention that the second house and the 12th house can't be, and the sixth house can't be in Arudha. Because what I did is I went through all of the houses. What if you're Arudha? And I went through all of the houses. And then I realized that that's, first off, there are a few houses that mathematically can't be the Arudha. And then I started really looking at the theory of it, and I came to an epiphany about what the Arudha Lagna is. And then it all fell into place for me. And so I'm going to talk about it right now. So I'm going to be giving you something that, to my knowledge, no other Vedic astrologer, perhaps in history, has ever mentioned about what the Arudha Lagna is, what its purpose is. And once you understand it, then you will understand why both the two schools, Parashara and Jaimini, are only partially right about the placement of the Arudha. So first, let's talk about what the Arudha Lagna is. The Arudha Lagna is the reflection of the Lagna. The Lagna is the ascendant. In Vedic astrology, which by the way is different from Western astrology, we are using the sidereal zodiac, which takes into account the wobbling of the earth. So the precession of the stars and everything is accurate. Western astrology is still going by an outdated tropical zodiac, which was, a mistake from 2,000 years ago when people didn't know how to take into account the wobbling of the earth. So the sky that you see when you look at your Western chart is off by 24 degrees, which means that if you get a Western astrological reading, your sun, which they use the sun sign, your sun may be in a different sign. Your planets may be in a different sign. Your rising sign almost certainly will be different because it's 24 degrees off. Okay? So Vedic astrology actually is the accurate understanding of how the sky moves. So I recommend, if you haven't got a Vedic astrological reading and you are interested in astrology, that you get one. You can go here to astrology.thunderwizard.com, and here we will give you a reading on your Arudha Lagna. And by the way, if we haven't gotten to yours yet, you can subscribe and hit the bell button, and then we will get to your exact Arudha at some point. All right, so the Arudha Lagna is the reflection of the Lagna. The Lagna is the rising sign, which is how the soul interfaces with physical reality. Lagna means screwed into place. When you were born, you were screwed into place. When you popped out of the womb, you got stamped on the forehead with whatever star constellation was rising in the east. And that star constellation, in my case, I'm a Leo, it means that I see the world through the glasses of Leo. It doesn't necessarily mean that I completely identify with it, but it means that that is my personality when it comes to interacting with my life and my karmas. Okay? In Vedic astrology, we use the Lagna, the rising sign, as your sign, but you can also use your moon sign and then your sun sign. Those are in that order. Sun sign is a close second to the ascendant, and then the moon sign is just barely second in importance, and then the sun is way down here. It's important, but it doesn't have the importance that Western astrology puts on it. So your Lagna, your rising sign, that is the self, the way it looks at the world. This is going to have an Aruta, which means a mount. Mount is something you ride to get somewhere. You get on a horse and it takes you across town. Your mount will give you power. So the Aruta gives power to the ascendant, to the self. It gives power, and it is going to be your success. Now, if you have a true Arudha, which not everybody has a true Arudha, this is me talking now. You're now hearing the Thunder Wizard astrology. This has probably never been said before, but I believe this to be true. Not everybody has a true Arudha, but those that do have an Arudha, it is essential that you know what your Arudha is and that you project and allow this Arudha, this reflection to shine, because that is how you will gain success in your career and in your personal life. Remember, the Arudha is called the mount, so I call it your superpower. Now, here's my theory on what the Arudha is, why it's the reflection. The idea is you walk in the room and people don't see you, they see the reflection of you. If you are in conflict or ignorant of what that reflection is, people will at the very least be kind of turned off or feel a little uncomfortable, and they might outright dislike you, resent you, and want to get in the way of your success. So if you allow yourself to really project and reflect this Arudha and get your ego out of it, then people will want to support you. They will want to give you a job. They want to hire you. They want to give you money. They want to be your friend. And that is because if we understand what the Arudha is, in my belief, you will understand why this is and why some people have a true Arudha and some people don't. So before we get into where the Arudha can and cannot be, let's talk about what I'm saying the Arudha is. I believe that the Arudha, the reflection, the illusion of the self, comes into play with souls who have unresolved ego identity issues about certain aspects of their personality, certain strengths that they have. They have some kind of unresolved insecurity about it. So the Arudha is always associated with how you interact with society at large, which is why there are certain houses that the Arudha doesn't fall into. Just mathematically, it won't fall into certain houses. And when you look at those houses, you'll find out that these are houses that the energy is going inward, and therefore there's no way that it can have an issue about how people see you because they're internally experienced. So we'll go through that. So if you have an Arudha, especially if you have a strong Arudha with planets in it, and it's a powerful placement in a powerful house, it means that you have unresolved past life ego, psychological issues about your identity, and you are in conflict with it. Because the rule that I've proven to myself, and I've seen it in others, is that if you get out of the way and allow your false, illusionary reflection to shine and allow people to see you that way, what ends up happening is that you are successful. You are successful in your career, you're successful financially, you are successful socially. If you are ignorant, or if you are unconsciously in conflict with it, where you are going into the public trying to make people see you a certain way and they don't, then that is going to get in the way of your success. People will feel uncomfortable or resentful. Because my belief is that the Arudha is a power that you've had, a positive aspect to your personality that because of your own insecurity in the past, you either had a bad experience with it and or you are going through some false humility about it, and so you're trying to hide it. Let me give you an example. In my case, I talk about myself not just because I'm a narcissist, I am, but also because, I've seen what's happened in my life through it. So I believe in the practical application of astrology, so I talk about myself. So I grew up with an older brother. He was 5 years older than me. He was much bigger than me, much stronger than me. He was like he was the neighborhood bully, and he used to just bully the crap out of me. He used to, beat me up and harass me and intimidate me, and growing up with him was hell. So, of course, now from my perspective, my soul projected him into my life so that I would be forced to deal with my own issues having to do with all of that stuff. So, what I ended up coming away from that with was that I had to not be a bully. I had to not be a tough guy. Because number one, as I was a kid, if I tried to be a tough guy, I got the tar beaten out of me. But also, I did not want to harm anybody else. I didn't want to frighten anybody else. I didn't want to intimidate other people. That was my conscious understanding. Those that know me know actually I can be quite intimidating, even when I'm not trying to be. And this is the karmic issue. It's unconscious. And so throughout much of my adult life, I actually tried to hide that. And what ended up happening is people got even more frightened of me. And I unconsciously, when I would lash out, I would blow up on people. Like the fuse would be really long, but once I got to the end of that fuse, I would blow up. Now, don't get me wrong, I haven't been in a fist fight since I was in junior high, so it wasn't that I physically blew up on him. But it meant the last thing you would want is if I've lost my fuse and I've decided to go after you, and I'm just the worst person to argue with. So what that means is that I have an experience that I have to protect people from this dark side of me. When in reality, this is actually my strength. And the universe is saying, hang on, Mike, you got to get some ego balance about this. You're trying to hide this very powerful, positive trait that you have. And because you're hiding it, you are denying people the benefits of it. And worse off than that, you're going to unconsciously lash out at people. So I was born with my Arudha being Mars in the third house in Libra. Libra is a Venus sign, and Venus is a peaceful sign. And I've lived my whole life taken a vow of nonviolence, and yet I'm like crazy warrior guy. So that's the Arudha, and it landed in the third house, which is the house of communication and the house of writing. And as you know, I am a writer and I'm a communicator, and my big thing is communication and language. That's the third house, and I do it very forcefully, and I'm very direct, and when I'm teaching and working with people, I'm ruthlessly direct, and I go after their insecurities and their denial. And that is good in when I'm a teacher. It's not good on a personal note when I'm in conflict with people. That can be really damaging. So this is what the Arudha is. The Arudha isn't how you're supposed to be all the time. It is what will bring you success and fame when you are acting as yourself in the outer world, presenting yourself to the outer world. This is why the Arudha, sometimes the exact Arudha, is what you should be doing for a living. And so I had to go through a lot of self analysis to get my own ego out of the way and accept that the part of me that is the one thing that can be really damaging and that I'm afraid of is also the very thing that is bringing healing to the world when I am operating as a teacher. So you can see the karmic lesson in there for me, meaning that if somebody has a really intense Arudha, they are going to feel uncomfortable about it, and they will probably fight against it. And then that will bring them struggles when it comes to their finances and their career. So the Arudha is an unresolved psychological issue having to do with how you are portrayed, how you express yourself to the world. So some people have the Arudha and some people don't. So the rules are, according to there are two schools of Vedic astrology. There's the Parashara school, which has to do with, if I understand this right, houses and planets. And then there's the Jaimini school, which functions with signs and sign aspects. So on the surface, they seem totally contradictory when in reality they're two layers of the same thing. But if you don't understand them, it can be confusing. Now, both of these schools have different beliefs about the rules of the Aruda. They both believe in the Aruda, but they have two different views on it. The Parashara school says that the Aruda cannot fall in the first house or the seventh house. And the reasoning behind it is that it can't land in the first house because the Aruda is the reflection of the first house. So the first house can't be the reflection of itself. Then they say it can't land in the seventh house because the seventh house is one of the natural reflections of the first, which means the first house is the self and the seventh house is the other, the wife, and also the society at large, meaning friends, family, organizations. And so they say the seventh house can't be the reflection of the self. And so so they say if it lands in the first house, then it has to go to the natural place of fame, which is the 10th house. The 10th house is not the Aruda, but it is the fame of the person. So they say, no, the 10th house is now the Aruda. And if they say in Parashara, if it lands in the 7th house, it can't be that. So it has to be the 10th house from there. Because if the 10th house is the fame of the first house, then the fame of the 7th house will be the 4th house. So if it lands in the 7th house, then the 4th house is the Aruda. Okay? So that's the rules of Parashara. Now, Jaimini has different rules and says, no, the Aruda can be anywhere. Doesn't follow the rules at all, which means that if it lands in the first house, then the first house is the Aruda, meaning that if you're a Leo and you have Sun in the first house, then the first house from the first house is the first house. So they say that's your Aruda. And they say, yeah, the 7th house, it can be the 7th house. There's nothing wrong with that. I'm taking a stance in the middle, and I'm doing it not based on intellectual knowledge. I understand both of these schools of thought and why they say what they say. I'm going off of my personal experience, my experience as an astrologer, and my intuition. And the problem with, including myself, the problem with teachers who come up with knowledge for the first time is they're looking for the rules that will make sense for it. And sometimes they get so bogged down in the rules they don't use their intuition. So here's what I believe. I do not believe that the Aruda can fall in the first house. I believe that Parashara was right. And this is, again, my instinct tells me this. When I try and analyze the first house as the Aruda, my instinct goes, that just doesn't make sense. The whole point of the Aruda is that it is the reflection of the first house, and it is because the person has a karmic issue with their identity and they have insecurities, and they, in order to overcome those insecurities, they have to embrace this powerful Maya. When they go out in public, people see something in them that they don't see in themselves, and the whole karmic issue is to get the ego out of the way so that you can accept what people are saying. And their job in this life is to tell you, no, this aspect of you is really good. I want to pay you money to be that way. So if the Aruda falls in the first house, how can that's already the self. The self is looking out through the lens of whatever sign it is. It doesn't make any sense. So if the Aruda falls in the first house, it means that this person in this lifetime doesn't have a karmic identity insecurity that they have to work through. So they can just be themselves. People will see them for who they are. The natural fame of the first house is the 10th house. So for them, the 10th house acts as an Aruda. It isn't an Aruda. The people whose Aruda fall in the first house, it means that they don't have that issue. And so they can just be a normal person, and they can just allow their fame, their 10th house, to be who they are. Okay? Now, that doesn't mean that they don't have issues. It just means in this lifetime, for whatever reason, they don't have to go through the hard lessons of looking at their identity issues in this area. Okay? So, I do believe that it can be in the seventh. I agree. So, I agree with Parashara that the first cannot be the Arudha. Doesn't make sense. But I agree with Jaimini that the Arudha can be the seventh. But I am also of the opinion that the Kendra houses, which are the first, the fourth, the seventh, and the 10th, are not true Arudha houses. And the first and the fourth, we found out the Arudha can't fall there because mathematically, unless you use the exception rules of Parashara, the Arudha will never fall in the fourth house. Mathematically, it just won't happen. So, if the Arudha falls in the seventh house, then it means that in this life, people have to really work on their skills in relationship. So people will see this about them. It will be an Arudha that people will see them based on whatever planet and whatever sign their seventh house is. And so it just means that they will have to work on that issue in relationships. So they do have an Arudha, but it's not as intense because it's in a Kendra house. I'm saying Kendra houses don't really serve for personal identity, ego issues. They are already the houses of connecting with the outside world, except for the fourth house. All right, so those are the rules. So here's what I'm saying: the Arudha falls in the third, the fifth, the seventh, the ninth, the 10th, or the 11th. It will not fall mathematically. It just won't fall into any of the other signs, except for the first house. And I'm saying if it does that, then it's the 10th house. That's the only reason the 10th house is an Arudha, is because it really means the first house Arudha going to the 10th. Okay? All right, so now let's walk through the houses. I'll walk through each house, all 12 of them, and I'll tell you why they can't be an Arudha, and or if they are an Arudha, what they mean, very briefly. So, we've already talked about the first house. First house can't be an Arudha because you can't be a reflection of yourself. It doesn't make any sense. We've talked about that. The second house. Now, the second house, when I started thinking about the second house, even though mathematically it's impossible, I started thinking about the second house and I started applying the rule that I have, which is the Arudha will always have to do with how you express yourself to the world. The second house is about how you interact with your family. This is where you find your family, your nuclear family, your ancestry. So this is still kind of going backwards, and it's still an internally facing house. It is the house of your resources, like it'll show you how much money you have or some gifts that you have. There you can see if somebody has a gift for speaking or a gift for writing. These things can be seen in the second house, but they're not about expressing to the world. It's about an internal experience between you and your nuclear family and your ancestors. And so there isn't going to be an ego issue about how you express yourself to the world. You may have issues there, but it won't be attached to expressing to the world. So therefore, not only mathematically is it impossible, but based on my rule, it won't work because it's not a house of external expression. Third house. Third house is a very powerful house. It is the house of your bravery. So there you are. People are going to have ego issues about bravery, and having something to prove. I obviously do. I struggle with that all the time. I get into flame wars. I fight with people, and my ego is easily poked. But at the same time, my strength in teaching is speaking forcefully and speaking the truth, and my bravery. I teach about bravery. My books and my teachings are all about being brave and being fearless. So clearly, this is something that I have. You have Mars in the third house, you have a brave person. So, the Mars in the third house, Ketu in the third house, uh, Rahu in the third house, Sun in the third house. These are very powerfully brave people. So these are people who can potentially be very fearless. So again, bravery, there's going to be an ego identity issue there. Communication, the third house is communication. It's writing books, short-term communications. So anytime you're communicating to the masses or just communicating to people in general, there is the potential for identity issues because people are reserved in their communication or they overcompensate and they're too forceful in their communication. So there's an ego issue there. So if your Arudha lands in the third house, it means that you have a karmic issue, and the universe is saying you have to embrace this gift of yours, and you have to learn to work through your issues about it so that you can come to maturity when it comes to your communication, your writing, those kinds of things. Third house is also hands, so that's why it's writing, but it also can be healing. So if the moon is there, it means somebody is a healer, but they may have a karmic identity issue. Maybe they're afraid. Maybe in a past life they were killed because they had the healing power, and in this life they're a masseuse. Well, what's really happening is they're a healer, and they're working through their identity issues about having healing abilities. This just gives you an idea. Anyway, we could go through all the planets, but I've done that already. So that's the third house. The fourth house. Why is the fourth house not a house of the Arudha? Number one, mathematically, it will never happen unless you use the rules of Parashara, which say that the 10th from the 7th is the 4th. But that's only if you say the 7th house can't be an Arudha. I'm saying the 7th house is a pseudo Arudha, so it can be. Therefore, there's no need for the 4th house Arudha. The 4th house is the opposite from the 10th. The 10th is the house of your fame. So this is why it's used as the house of career, because this is what you are known for. That's different from how you are perceived. How you are perceived is your Arudha. What you are known for is what you actually do. And so it is the house of your career. So the 10th house is the natural house of expression to the public. The 4th house is the opposite of that. It's the home. It's when you're sitting at home with your feet up on the kitchen table with the shoes off, and you're sitting around in your wife beater underwear, and you're eating Cheetos, and you're burping and farting and watching television. It's a very internal experience. It's not about expression to the world. So there's no need for working through identity issues having to do with the external world in the 4th house, because the 4th house doesn't function that way. The 5th house. The 5th house is a house of the Arudha, and it is the house of study. It is the house of like going to college and studying things, education. It is also the house of lovemaking. It is the house of romance. It is the house of performance, acting, singing, musicians, writing big novels and huge epic movies. Gone with the Wind, that's the 5th house. The Kardashians, 3rd house. So the 5th house is big literary things. All of these things, everything I've mentioned, has to do with the ego. Now the 5th house is the natural house of Leo, which is the sun, and the sun is the ego, is the king. So this is a house where you can definitely have identity issues having to do with expressing and interacting with the world. Because people get very up, I went to Yale, I went to so-and-so. There's a lot of ego attached to all of the things that we just mentioned. So it can be the 5th house. The 6th house. The 6th house cannot be an Arudha house, number one, because mathematically the Arudha will never fall there. So if we assume that this is a real science, then the universe is saying, well, the 6th house doesn't doesn't have any need for the Arudha landing there. So what is the sixth house? The sixth house is the house of karma, the house of hard work. The 10th house is the house of work, but it's the house of work that you gain fame for. The sixth house is just your karma that you got to work through. It's hard work. So it's the house of diseases, it's the house of difficulties, it's the house of enemies. And we could say, well, enemies has an ego thing, but what I'm saying is that the sixth house is an internal house. When you have expressive planets like the moon or Jupiter and you put them in the sixth house, they get very uncomfortable because it's like putting them in a cave. It's actually the eighth house is the cave, the sixth house is the jail cell. So when you're in the jail cell, you're definitely focused on yourself, and you may have ego issues, but they're not going to come up because you're in you're in isolation. And so the ego issues, there's no need for the Arudha to be there. It doesn't accomplish anything. Seventh house. The seventh house is a pseudo Arudha, meaning that it can be the Arudha. It means that if your Arudha lands in the seventh house, it means that what you need to do is learn how to be a better partner. So people will see you in terms of relationship. And so that's how you will be perceived based on the planet and the sign and everything else. But it doesn't mean that you have a huge ego attachment issue that you have to deal with. It just means that your lesson here is you have to learn whatever lessons are coming in relationship. So it is an Arudha, but it's not as intense. It doesn't have the emotional heat to it that the other true Arudha houses have. Okay, then we go to the eighth house. The eighth house cannot be a house for the Arudha, number one, because mathematically it will never fall in there. So that's that. So then we have to ask, all right, regardless of rules or no rules, the universe has said the eighth house will never be an Arudha. Why is that? The eighth house is the house of the unconscious. So this is deep in the unconscious mind. That never comes to the light of day. We can see the effects of the unconscious, but the unconscious is a cave. And so your ego issues is what you deal with. It's the nightmares that you have or your internal experience of yourself. It's like when you're dreaming. When you dream, you may have an intense dream, but nobody else in the world sees or experiences that, only you do. So there is no avenue for the ego to deal with any insecurities having to do with interacting with the public. You can have all that stuff in the eighth house, but it can't be an Arudha because that doesn't have anything to do with your immediate external expression to the world. It's your internal dream world, your unconscious issues, where that comes from. Okay, so this is now really giving me a greater understanding of all the houses. I'm really enjoying this. All right, so we move from the eighth house to the ninth house. The ninth house is a house for the Arudha. Because what is the ninth house? The ninth house is the house of religion. And if there is one place where we have ego insecurities, it is definitely going to be associated with religion. Religion is definitely about connecting to the masses and expressing to the masses. You still go to the temple, but it's like going to church. You know, people go to church to supposedly worship, but that's when they wear the big hats with the fancy feathers and the shoes, and people go there to show off to everybody, and people talk about their religion. I mean, people who are religious. I mean, I've got the trappings of religion on me now. I do this for a reason because this is my part of my Arudha, which my third house looks at the ninth house, which means that my communications are always going to have some spiritual connection, and people know me for that. So there's an ego issue there. So there's a communication issue because the third house will always be directly aspecting the ninth house. So it has to be a house of for the ego expression. I could go into it. It's also the house of the father. It's the house of authority figures. So there's always ego insecurity issues about how we relate to them in the real world. So the ninth house, definitely a house for the Aruta. The 10th house. The 10th house, according to my rules, can't be a true Aruta, but since it's the Aruta for those whose Aruta lands in the first house, then it's just the normal fame. We've already talked about it. Same thing I said about if it lands in the first house, it's in the 10th house. 10th house is just your fame. It just means in this lifetime you don't have huge ego issues that you have to work through, just normal karmic stuff. Doesn't mean it's not important, but what it's going to mean is that people are going to see you based on your merits. That's the truth of it. Here's a tip for you, those of you who have Arudas in other houses like mine. I have the effect on people that I haven't earned. I'm going to give you an example. So I have Mars in the third house. Mars in the third house just by itself means martial artist. It means with your hands you can hit. It means that you're good with weapons. This is true. I have a natural knack. I've always been good at that. But I haven't been in a fist fight since I was in junior high. It's true I was the toughest kid in school when I was fighting. But when I stopped fighting, I haven't fought since. I have been, let me give you an example. I played a kickboxer in a movie with an actual martial art, two of them. Like one guy was an actual kickboxer that went in the ring and was a kickboxer. And he talked about me in the third person as this street fighter thug. He knows nothing about me. He somehow got the impression that I was this cage fighter. It's my Aruda. I gained that without having earned it. I remember when I was rehearsing with the writer of the movie, who himself was a black belt in Taekwondo, and he had fought. This is a guy who fought, and we went to just square off in rehearsal. We weren't even going to fight or spar. We were just squaring off, and he said, "You're scaring the crap out of me." I scared him. He hasn't the first. There's a bunch of other like martial artists who've been in the ring. They get scared of me. That's because my Aruda is it gives me an aura of being a fighter that I haven't earned. Not in this lifetime, maybe in previous lifetimes. And listen, I'm not, I would be the last person that you would want to pick a fight with because I do have skills, but I've never gone out there in public. I've never fought in the ring. I've never, I've made a vow of nonviolence my whole life. This is what the Aruda will bring. The 10th house is different from that, because the 10th house is actually what you earn through your efforts, through your hard work. In the 6th house, your hard work of the 6th house will create what you earn in the 10th house, which will give you your gains in the 11th house. So when somebody has a 10th house Aruda, it means they will be known for what they actually accomplish in this life. It may mean that, whatever your 10th house is, even if you're a young person, people are, instead of saying, wow, he's really this, they're going to say, I can see a lot of potential in you. I can see that if you keep it up and you put your mind to it, you're going to be very successful. So it's not a true Aruda. An Aruda comes with, you already are this. And that's how people see you. And it's an illusion. It's an illusion based in truth. But nevertheless, it has the experience for those who have a strong Aruda that you get all of this credit for something you haven't done yet. And so this is why, for many people, their Aruda can bring them tremendous fame and success, but only if they let people have their experience. Okay? Let people have their experience of you, and it will feel like I have the same experience. My Aruda is definitely what I'm doing right now. I am babbling on and on and on in a very narcissistic way on video, on YouTube and spirituality. This is my Aruda. If you look at third house in Swati Pada 2 in all of that, you will see, oh, that's exactly what he does for a living. And for the life of me, I don't know why you people want to listen to it. But the more that I do it, the more you want to hear it, which means it's my Arudha that you're responding to. And I get credit for something that I personally don't feel a connection to. The 10th house, you will feel a connection. You will know because you will remember having earned it. Okay? So that's the 10th house pseudo Arudha. The 11th house. The 11th house is a house of the Arudha, and it is the direct aspected directly by the 5th house. So do you see that? The Arudha houses aspect each other. This is telling you something about those houses. The houses that don't have Arudhas also aspect each other. The 6th and the 12th, the 2nd and the 8th. Those houses aspect each other, meaning that even those aspects are internal processes that happen inside the psyche of the person. The ones that are staring at each other, in this case, the 5th house and the 11th house, this has to do with your experience and interaction with the world. The 11th house is the house of networking. So you're definitely going to have potential ego issues about how you network with the world. Salesmen, the gains that you make. We have strong ego attachments to what we accomplish in the world. The 10th house is the actual accomplishment. The 11th house is the gains, the fame, the money that you gain from what the 6th and the 10th house do in terms of your work and your karmic work. The 11th house is an upachaya house, which means that it grows over time. So we've noticed that at least the 3rd house and the 10th house and the 11th house are upachaya houses. The 6th and the 8th are too internal, even though they are also upachaya houses as well. Or the 6th house. I can't remember if the 8th is or not. Anyway, you get what I'm saying with this. These things grow over time. They have to do with your external expression to the world. Then we come to the 12th house. The 12th house is directly opposite the 6th house. The 6th house is a very internal house. It aspects the 12th house. The 12th house is you leaving this world. So when you leave this world, you're leaving your ego behind. So this is why people who have strong 12th houses, they have this internal world that nobody else can experience. So you're not going to have ego identity issues that are connected to that in a way that has to do with your expression to the world. The 2nd house and the 12th house represent just treasures that you have within you. One is the actual treasures of your money, your upbringing, your status in society. The 12th house is the treasures of your ability to connect to the other world and what you take with you to the other world. So there's no ego identity, psychological issues that have to be dealt with. Okay, so let's go over it again. The 1st house is already your ego because it's yourself. It's redundant to turn that into an Arudha. 2nd house can't be an Arudha because it's about your interaction with your family and your ancestors and things like that, which is not about how you interact with the world. It's a gift that gives you things for the external world, but it's not a house of expression to the external world. 3rd house, the house of communication and bravery, hands, definitely an expression of the external world. 4th house is the internal experience when you're at home, the nurturing, the self-care, that can't be an Arudha. 5th house, your education, your performance, your lovemaking, your sex, your romance, definitely ego involved there. 6th house, karma, the isolation of being in the prison of your own karmic stuff, that's your own internal experience. 7th house, pseudo Arudha. It does have to do with other people, but it's really about you learning how to be a better person in relationships. Eighth house, unconscious mind. It's completely blocked off from the external world. There's no point about expression or ego attachment there in terms of your relationship to others. Ninth house, religion, travel, uh, dharma, definitely going to be a house of ego expression to the external world. 10th house, the natural house of the Arudha, but it's a pseudo Arudha because you are known for it, but you have to work for it. It's the actual fame you get from what you actually do. 11th house, the house of your gains, what you gain, the reputation that you gain, that you're attached to, that you've worked for, your networking to the world, your money that you've gained. Definitely going to be an ego attachment as to how you express yourself to the world. 12th house is your house of leaving this world. It's the opposite. It's not just internal, it's just out of here. It's the exit. Once you've exited the room, if you look at it in terms of your character has left the room. He's been killed off in the series. Doesn't work anymore. Okay? So those are my thoughts about the Arudha through houses. And now you have a deeper understanding. And you can take that, if you really look at that, you can take that when you're looking at somebody's astrology chart, and it'll give you a deeper insight into a lot of things. But meditate on that. I feel this is really big. Anyway, that's it for me. If you don't know what your Arudha is, you can go to astrology.thunderwizard.com. If you want to learn my style of astrology, we do have a few days left for the month of May. You can go here to, you can go here. You can go here to 241.thunderwizard.com and you can get certification 2-for-1, both the astrology certification and the rune certification for the month of May. You get half off. You get 2 certifications for the price of 1. Once we get to the end of May, I will discontinue this. This is just for me to earn some extra money as I make my way off to Australia. All right, so that's it for me today. It's a big one. All right, you guys, I'll talk to you soon.